The alien ship descended silently through the vast expanse of space, its sleek metallic surface glinting faintly under the light of distant stars. The crew aboard the Zarathus had traveled for centuries, their lifespans extended by advanced technology that allowed them to endure the long journey across galaxies. They were explorers, scientists from the planet Zethira, sent to observe and study civilizations they deemed primitive but intriguing. Their destination was Earth, a small blue-green orb floating in the darkness of the cosmos, teeming with life forms known as humans. Kalen stood at the helm of the ship, his tall frame draped in a flowing robe that shimmered like liquid silver. His sharp eyes scanned the holographic displays hovering around him, analyzing data streaming in from Earth's atmosphere. Beside him stood Vera, her expression calm yet cautious. She was second in command and often acted as the voice of reason, when Kalen's curiosity got the better of him. Together, they led the mission to understand humanity, a species that fascinated them despite its violent history. On Earth, Rachel Monroe walked along the edge of the Pacific Ocean, her boots sinking slightly into the wet sand. She was a marine biologist who spent most of her days studying the delicate balance of ocean ecosystems. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her face carried traces of sunburn from hours spent outdoors. Today, however, something felt different. The waves seemed restless, crashing against the shore with unusual force. Even the birds appeared agitated, circling overhead without landing. Rachel frowned, jotting notes in her weathered notebook before heading back to her car. Later that evening, she met Ethan Brooks at their favorite diner in town. Ethan was a geologist with a knack for reading patterns in rocks and soil. He had an easygoing demeanor, always ready with a joke or story about his travels. Tonight, though, his brow furrowed as he listened to Rachel describe what she had seen earlier. "It could just be a storm brewing offshore," he suggested between bites of his burger, though his tone betrayed uncertainty. "But there's something else," Rachel replied, leaning forward. "I've been noticing these anomalies for weeks now. Changes in water temperature, shifts in animal behavior. It's like the ocean is trying to tell us something." Unbeknownst to them, the aliens had already landed. The Zarathus hovered invisibly above Mount Hood, its cloaking device rendering it undetectable to human instruments. Small teams of Zethirans moved stealthily across the landscape, gathering samples and observing the environment. They wore devices that projected human-like appearances over their true forms, allowing them to blend seamlessly into crowds. To anyone passing by, they looked like ordinary people going about their day. But beneath their disguises, they studied everything: the way humans interacted, how they built their cities, and the scars they left on the planet. Back at the diner, Rachel tapped her pen nervously against the table. "What if it's not natural?" she asked suddenly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean like aliens?" he teased, chuckling at the absurdity of the idea. Rachel didn't laugh. Instead, she stared out the window, watching the sky grow darker. Something deep inside told her this wasn't just another environmental fluctuation. It was bigger, stranger, and possibly dangerous. Meanwhile, miles away in Washington, D.C., Claire Dawson sat hunched over her computer screen in a dimly lit office. As an intelligence analyst, she spent her days sifting through mountains of data, searching for anything out of the ordinary. Tonight, she stumbled upon something that made her heart race. Satellite images showed strange energy spikes emanating from remote locations across the globe, places where no human activity should have been detected. She zoomed in on one image, her fingers trembling slightly as she highlighted the anomaly. Whatever it wasn't normal. Claire hesitated before forwarding the file to her supervisor, Benjamin Hayes. Ben was a seasoned bureaucrat who preferred order and routine over chaos and speculation. When he called her into his office the next morning, she braced herself for skepticism. Sure enough, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he glanced at the report. "Claire, you know we can't jump to conclusions based on blurry satellite photos," he said firmly. "Let's not start panicking until we have concrete evidence." Frustrated but unwilling to push further, Claire nodded and returned to her desk, unable to shake the feeling that they were missing something important. As days passed, the aliens continued their observations, careful not to interfere directly. Kalen marveled at humanity's achievements, the towering skyscrapers, the intricate networks of roads and railways, the art and music created by beings so seemingly fragile. Yet he couldn't ignore the darker aspects either. Wars waged over land and resources, pollution choking the air and water, entire species driven to extinction by human hands. It was a paradox that both intrigued and troubled him. Vera shared his concerns, often reminding him of their primary directive: assess the threat level posed by humanity and decide whether intervention was necessary. Rachel and Ethan's investigation took them deeper into the wilderness surrounding Mount Hood. Armed with equipment borrowed from the university, they set up camp near a secluded lake rumored to be haunted by locals. Neither believed in ghosts, but they couldn't deny the eerie atmosphere that hung over the area. One night, as they reviewed their findings by the glow of a lantern, Rachel noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. She turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. Standing at the edge of the trees was a figure cloaked in shadow. It watched them silently for a moment before vanishing into the darkness. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and rushed toward the spot where the figure had been, calling out for whoever or whatever it was. Rachel followed close behind, her pulse racing. They found nothing but footprints leading away from the clearing, disappearing abruptly as if the person had simply evaporated. "This isn't possible," Ethan muttered, crouching to examine the prints more closely. Rachel nodded, though her mind raced with possibilities. Could it be connected to the strange phenomena she had observed? Or was she letting her imagination run wild? Back in D.C., Claire grew increasingly frustrated with the lack of action from her superiors. Determined to uncover the truth, she began digging deeper into classified archives, piecing together fragments of information that hinted at previous encounters with unidentified objects in Earth's atmosphere. Each discovery fueled her conviction that they were dealing with something far beyond human comprehension. Late one night, she printed out a stack of documents and slipped them into her bag, intending to share her findings with someone outside the agency, someone who might believe her. The stage was set for collision, a convergence of curiosity, fear, and misunderstanding that would soon spiral out of control. For now, though, the players remained unaware of each other's roles in the unfolding drama. Rachel and Ethan pursued answers in the wilds of Oregon, while Claire risked everything to expose the truth hidden within government walls. Above it all, the aliens watched and waited, their presence a silent harbinger of the chaos to come. And so the story unfolded, one step closer to the revelation that neither side could have anticipated. The forest was eerily quiet as Rachel and Ethan packed up their campsite near the lake. The mysterious figure they had seen the night before lingered in their thoughts, casting a shadow over what should have been an ordinary research trip. Rachel tightened the straps on her backpack, her hands trembling slightly as she replayed the moment in her mind. The figure had stood so still, almost like it wasn't breathing, and then it vanished without a sound. She glanced at Ethan, who was scanning the trees with a pair of binoculars. "Do you think we imagined it?" she asked softly. Ethan lowered the binoculars and shook his head. "I don't know what to think," he admitted, "but I'm not leaving until we find out." As they ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew colder and the sunlight filtering through the canopy seemed dimmer than before. They followed the trail of footprints that had disappeared the previous night, hoping to find some clue about who, or what, had been watching them. After hours of searching, they stumbled upon something strange. A patch of ground near a cluster of boulders appeared scorched, its surface smooth and glassy as if subjected to intense heat. Rachel knelt down to examine it, running her fingers lightly over the unnatural texture. "This doesn't look natural," she murmured. Ethan nodded, snapping photos with his camera. "Whatever made this isn't from around here," he said, his voice tinged with both excitement and unease. Unbeknownst to them, they were being observed once again. Hidden among the trees, one of the aliens watched silently, its holographic disguise flickering faintly as it struggled to maintain the projection. The alien's name was Liren, a young scientist eager to prove themselves on their first mission. Liren had been assigned to collect samples from Earth's ecosystems, but hadn't anticipated encountering humans so directly. Now, faced with the Possibility of discovery. Liren hesitated. Should they retreat and report back to Kalen, or attempt to gather more information? The decision weighed heavily, but curiosity ultimately won out. Rachel suddenly froze, her eyes locking onto something, behind Ethan. He turned quickly, startled by her expression, and saw it too, a shimmering distortion in the air, like heat waves rising off asphalt. The distortion shifted and solidified into the form of a man, though there was something unsettling about him. His features were too perfect, his movements too fluid. He stepped forward cautiously, raising a hand in what might have been a gesture of peace. "Who are you?" Rachel demanded, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. The figure tilted its head, studying them intently. Then, to their astonishment, it spoke. "We mean no harm," it said in a voice that sounded oddly mechanical, yet calm. Ethan took a step back, instinctively reaching for the flashlight clipped to his belt. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone sharper than intended. The figure didn't respond immediately, instead glancing around as if assessing its surroundings. Finally, it said, "We are observers." Rachel frowned, her mind racing to process what she was hearing. "Observers of what?" she pressed, taking a cautious step closer. The figure hesitated before replying, "Of your world. Of you." Before either of them could ask another question, the figure flickered briefly and then vanished, leaving them staring at empty space. Back in Washington, D.C., Claire Dawson sat in her cramped apartment, surrounded by piles of documents and printouts. Her sleepless nights were beginning to show, dark circles forming under her eyes as she pored over the classified files she had smuggled out of the agency. Each page contained fragments of information, reports of unexplained phenomena, sightings of unidentified objects, and even whispers of past encounters with extraterrestrial beings. Claire felt a growing certainty that the anomalies she had detected were connected to something far bigger than anyone realized. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself any longer. Determined to share her findings, Claire reached out to Daniel Harper, a journalist known for his investigative work on conspiracy theories. Daniel was skeptical at first, dismissing her, claims as paranoia fueled by too many late nights. But when she showed him the documents, his skepticism turned to intrigue. "If even half of this is true, it's the story of a lifetime," he said, flipping through the pages. Claire nodded, her expression grim. "It's all true," she replied. "And if we don't do something, people will die." Daniel agreed. To help. And together they began piecing together a narrative that would expose the truth. They worked tirelessly, cross-referencing Claire's data with public records and eyewitness accounts. As their article took shape, they decided to publish it online, knowing traditional media outlets would likely dismiss their claims. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, social media platforms were flooded with reactions ranging from disbelief to outright panic. Conspiracy theorists seized on the story, weaving elaborate tales of government cover-ups and impending alien invasions. Protesters gathered in major cities, demanding answers from authorities who refused to comment. The chaos reached a fever pitch when reports surfaced of strange lights in the sky over New York City. Thousands of people claimed to have witnessed glowing orbs hovering above the skyline, moving in patterns that defied explanation. News helicopters captured footage of the phenomenon, which quickly went viral. The images sparked widespread hysteria, with some interpreting the lights as a sign of imminent attack. Military forces were deployed to monitor the situation, though officials insisted there was no credible threat. Despite these assurances, fear spread like wildfire, leading to riots and looting in several urban centers. Amid the turmoil, Kalen and Vera convened an emergency meeting aboard the Zorathas. The situation on Earth was escalating faster than they had anticipated, and tensions among the crew were high. Some argued that humanity's violent tendencies justified immediate intervention, while others believed patience was still the best course of action. Kalen listened carefully to both sides, his expression unreadable. Finally, he addressed the group. "We came here to observe, not to interfere," he said firmly. "But we cannot ignore the consequences of our presence." Vera nodded in agreement, adding, "If we reveal ourselves now, it may only worsen the situation." Meanwhile, Rachel and Ethan returned to town, their minds reeling from their encounter. They debated whether to go public with what they had seen, knowing it would invite ridicule and scrutiny. In the end, they decided to contact local authorities, sharing their observations and the photos they had taken. To their surprise, the sheriff listened intently, promising to forward the information to higher-ups. However, it soon became clear that their report had been buried, dismissed as the ramblings of overactive imaginations. Frustrated but undeterred, Rachel resolved to continue investigating on her own. As days turned into weeks, the world remained gripped by uncertainty. Governments scrambled to contain the fallout from Daniel's article, issuing vague statements meant to reassure the public while secretly scrambling to understand the nature of the threat. Military installations across the globe went on high alert, preparing for the possibility of conflict. In the midst of the chaos, Rachel, Ethan, Claire, and Daniel found themselves drawn together by a shared goal: to uncover the truth and prevent disaster. Though they came from different walks of life, their paths converged in ways none of them could have predicted. Above it all, the aliens watched and waited, their mission complicated by the unintended consequences of their arrival. Kalen wrestled with doubt, questioning whether they had underestimated humanity's capacity for destruction. Vera, ever the pragmatist, reminded him of their purpose. "We must decide soon," she said quietly, "before it's too late." And so the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of understanding between two vastly different species, one driven by survival, the other by curiosity, and force them to confront the fragile balance between coexistence and annihilation. The tension in the air was palpable as Rachel and Ethan sat huddled in her small apartment, surrounded by maps, photos, and notes scattered across every available surface. The world outside was unraveling, gripped by fear and confusion, but they had no time to dwell on it. Their encounter with the alien figure near Mount Hood haunted them, its cryptic words replaying in their minds. "We are observers," it had said before vanishing into thin air. Observers of what and why? These questions gnawed at Rachel, driving her to dig deeper despite the risks. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he tried to make sense of the growing pile of evidence. "If we're right about what's happening, then this is bigger than anything we've ever seen," he muttered. Rachel nodded, her eyes fixed on a grainy photo of the scorched patch of ground they had found. "We need to figure out what they want," she said firmly. "And fast." Ethan sighed, knowing she was right, but dreading what might come next. They couldn't do this alone. Not anymore. Unbeknownst to them, Claire Dawson was facing her own struggles. Her decision to leak classified information had not gone unnoticed, and she now found herself under intense scrutiny from her superiors. Benjamin Hayes called her into his office one morning, his expression unreadable as he slid a folder across the desk. Inside were screenshots of the article Daniel Harper had published, along with a list of sources traced back to Claire. "Care to explain this?" he asked, his tone icy. Claire swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. "I did what I thought was right," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Hayes leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You've put lives at risk," he said sternly, "including your own." Claire left the office shaken but resolute. She knew she had crossed a line, but she also believed the truth was worth the consequences. That evening, she met Daniel at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. He listened intently as she recounted her confrontation with Hayes, his expression growing darker with each word. "They're scared," he said finally, "and when people are scared, they make mistakes." Claire nodded, her hands trembling, around the warm mug of coffee. "What do we do now?" she asked. Daniel hesitated before answering. "We keep going," he said, "no matter what." As the days passed, the situation grew increasingly volatile. Military forces, under orders from General Marcus Reed, began mobilizing near Mount Hood. Reconnaissance teams reported unusual energy readings emanating from the area, confirming suspicions that something, or someone, was hiding there. Reed, a grizzled veteran with little patience for ambiguity, saw only one solution: neutralize the threat before it could escalate further. His plan involved deploying a specialized unit equipped with experimental weapons designed to disable unknown technologies. The operation was risky, but Reed believed it was necessary to protect humanity. Kalen and Vera, meanwhile, convened another urgent meeting aboard the Zarathis. Reports from their team on the ground painted a grim picture. Humanity's response to their presence had spiraled out of control, fueled by fear and misinformation. Some crew members argued for immediate withdrawal, claiming the mission had already failed. Others advocated for a show of force, believing it would deter further aggression. Kalen listened silently, his mind racing as he weighed the options. Finally, he turned to Vera. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. Vera hesitated before responding. "If we leave now, we abandon our purpose," she said. "But if we stay, we risk making things worse." Their debate was interrupted by an urgent transmission from Liren, the young scientist who had been observing Rachel and Ethan. Liren reported that military forces were closing in on their position, unaware of the potential consequences of their actions. Kalen's expression darkened as he processed the news. "We must act quickly," he said, rising to his feet. "Prepare the defense systems, but do not engage unless absolutely necessary." Vera nodded, though her heart sank at the thought of conflict. They had come to Earth seeking understanding, not war. Back on the ground, Rachel and Ethan received a tip from a local ranger about increased military activity near Mount Hood. Concerned about what it might mean, they decided to investigate. Armed with nothing but their cameras and determination, they drove to the edge of the restricted zone, parking their vehicle out of sight. As they approached the perimeter, they noticed soldiers setting up equipment and scanning the area with advanced devices. Rachel's stomach churned as she realized the implications. "They know something's here," she whispered. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a tree as a patrol passed nearby. "We need to warn them," he said urgently. "If they attack blindly, it could end badly for everyone." Their opportunity came sooner than expected. While hiding among the trees, they spotted Liren once again, its holographic disguise flickering under the strain of maintaining the projection. The alien seemed agitated, glancing around nervously as if anticipating danger. Rachel stepped forward cautiously, raising her hands to show she meant no harm. "We're not with them," she said softly. Liren hesitated before nodding, its features shifting slightly as it adjusted its appearance. "You must leave," it said, its voice tinged with urgency. "This place will soon be unsafe." Rachel shook her head stubbornly. "Not until you tell us why you're here," she insisted. Liren studied her for a moment before replying. "To observe," it said, "to decide whether your species poses a threat to others." Before Rachel could press further, the sound of distant explosions shattered the silence. Soldiers had begun their assault, firing projectiles designed to disrupt alien technology. The blasts echoed through the forest, sending birds scattering and shaking the ground beneath their feet. Liren's form flickered violently as it struggled to maintain its disguise. "Go now," it urged, its voice strained, "or you will be caught in the crossfire." Rachel and Ethan exchanged a glance before retreating hastily, their hearts pounding as chaos erupted around them. Inside the alien ship, alarms blared as the crew scrambled to respond to the attack. Defensive shields activated, deflecting most of the incoming projectiles, but the strain on their systems was evident. Kalen watched the monitors grimly, his jaw clenched as he observed the destruction unfolding below. "They don't understand," he muttered. "They're acting out of fear." Vera stood beside him, her expression somber. "Fear can be a powerful motivator," she said, "but it can also lead to ruin." The battle raged on, with neither side fully understanding the other's intentions. Soldiers fired blindly into the forest, convinced they were targeting a hostile force. Meanwhile, the aliens retaliated defensively, using non-lethal measures to disable their attackers. Despite their efforts to minimize casualties, the conflict resulted in widespread panic and devastation. Civilians caught in the crossfire suffered injuries or fled in terror, adding to the mounting toll of human suffering. Amid the chaos, Rachel and Ethan managed to reach safety, collapsing breathlessly on the floor of their car. "This isn't how it's supposed to end," Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. Ethan reached over, gripping her hand tightly. "It's not over yet," he replied. "We have to find a way to stop this." Rachel nodded, wiping her eyes as determination replaced despair. They couldn't give up, not when so much was at stake. In Washington, D.C., Claire and Daniel worked tirelessly to spread awareness of the escalating crisis. Their article had ignited a firestorm of public outrage, but it had also drawn unwanted attention from powerful figures determined to suppress the truth. Claire received anonymous threats warning her to back off, but she refused to be silenced. Together, she and Daniel compiled new evidence linking the government's secretive actions to the ongoing conflict. They knew exposing the full story carried immense risks, but they also believed it was the only way to prevent further bloodshed. As night fell, the world teetered on the brink of disaster. The aliens, misunderstood and cornered, prepared for the worst while clinging to hope that humanity might still prove itself worthy of trust. Rachel and Ethan, driven by a shared sense of purpose, vowed to bridge the gap between two vastly different species, and Claire and Daniel, armed with courage and conviction, fought to shine a light in the darkness. Each of them played a role in a story far greater than any of them could have imagined, a story of fear, misunderstanding, and the fragile possibility of redemption. The aftermath of the battle left scars on both the land and the people. Trees smoldered where blasts had struck, their charred remains standing like ghostly sentinels in the forest. Soldiers regrouped at the edge of the destruction zone, their faces streaked with dirt and exhaustion. General Marcus Reed paced back and forth, his boots crunching against the ash-covered ground as he barked orders into a radio. The assault had not gone as planned. Instead of neutralizing the threat, it had only deepened the mystery. Reports from the field described strange phenomena, projectiles that seemed to dissolve mid-air, bursts of light that disoriented troops, and an eerie silence that followed each retaliatory strike. Reed clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. "We need answers," he growled to his second-in-command. "Not more questions." Rachel and Ethan emerged from their hiding, spot as dawn broke, their clothes damp with dew and their bodies sore from hours spent crouched in the underbrush. They surveyed the devastation with heavy hearts, knowing they had been powerless to stop it. Rachel knelt beside a fallen tree, her fingers brushing against its blackened bark. "This isn't what we wanted," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "We still have a chance to fix this," he said firmly, "but we can't do it alone." Rachel nodded, her resolve hardening. If humanity was going to survive this crisis, they needed help, and fast. Back aboard the Zarathus, Kalen lay injured in the ship's medical bay, his body weakened by the strain of activating defensive measures during the attack. Vera stood beside him, her expression grim as she listened to updates from the crew. The damage to their vessel was significant, forcing them to consider whether retreat was their only option. Yet even as she weighed the risks, a part of her hesitated. She had seen glimpses of humanity's potential, the curiosity, the resilience, the flashes of compassion amid chaos. Could they truly abandon such a species without giving them one last chance? Kalen stirred weakly, his voice faint but steady. "You must decide," he said. "I trust your judgment." Vera took a deep breath, knowing the weight of the decision rested solely on her shoulders. Meanwhile, Claire Dawson and Daniel Harper worked tirelessly to piece together a message that might reach the aliens before it was too late. They had uncovered classified files detailing the existence of a prototype weapon, a nuclear device capable of catastrophic destruction if detonated near the alien ship. The weapon was designed as a last resort, but Claire feared it would be used recklessly, escalating the conflict beyond repair. She and Daniel drafted an open letter appealing directly to the extraterrestrial visitors. "We are flawed," they wrote, "but we are also capable of change. Please give us a chance to prove ourselves." Though they knew the odds of the message reaching its intended audience were slim, they refused to give up hope. In New York City, protests raged as citizens demanded answers about the mysterious events unfolding across the globe. Some called for peace, holding signs that read, "Talk, don't fight." Others urged retaliation, convinced the aliens posed an existential threat. Journalists swarmed the streets, capturing footage of the chaos for international audiences. Among the crowd stood Rachel and Ethan, who had traveled to the city in search of allies. They found themselves drawn to a group of scientists and activists, organizing a grassroots movement aimed at fostering dialogue rather than violence. One member, a soft-spoken physicist named Dr. Lisa Meyer, approached them after hearing their story. "If we can show them that we're more than our worst instincts, maybe we can find common ground," she said. Rachel exchanged a glance with Ethan before nodding. "We're with you," she replied. As days passed, tensions reached a breaking point. General Reed received authorization to deploy the prototype weapon, codenamed Eclipse, in a final attempt to neutralize the alien presence. The device was transported under heavy guard to a secure location near Mount Hood, its activation scheduled for the following morning. Claire learned of the plan through a contact within the military and immediately contacted Daniel. Together, they raced to intercept the convoy, hoping to delay the launch long enough to spread their message. Their efforts attracted unwanted attention, however, and they soon found themselves pursued by armed agents determined to silence them. On board the Zorathis, Vera convened a meeting with the remaining crew members. Her decision was clear. They would initiate planetary sterilization protocols unless evidence of humanity's capacity for good could be provided within the next 24 hours. The announcement sent shockwaves through the team, many of whom questioned whether such a drastic measure was justified. Lyron, still shaken by the encounter with Rachel and Ethan, stepped forward hesitantly. "There are individuals who seek understanding," it said. "Perhaps they represent a path forward." Vera considered the words carefully, her mind torn between duty and compassion. "Then we must give them time," she declared. "But not much." Rachel and Ethan joined forces with Dr. Meyer and her team to compile evidence of humanity's better nature. They gathered testimonials from ordinary people sharing acts of kindness, scientific breakthroughs aimed at healing the planet, and stories of communities coming together in times of crisis. The resulting presentation was a tapestry of hope, showcasing the best of what humanity had to offer. With no way to deliver it directly to the aliens, they turned to social media, broadcasting the message worldwide in hopes it would reach the right ears. The response was overwhelming, with millions joining the call for peace and understanding. Claire and Daniel narrowly avoided capture, thanks to the intervention of a sympathetic truck driver who smuggled them out of the city. Exhausted but determined, they made their way to Mount Hood, carrying copies of the presentation on a portable drive. Along the way, they encountered Rachel and Ethan, who had arrived separately with the same goal in mind. Together, they devised a plan to infiltrate the military base housing the Eclipse weapon and present their case to anyone willing to listen. It was a desperate gamble, but they saw no other choice. As dawn broke over the horizon, the four of them approached the base under the cover of darkness. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their flashlights cutting through the mist as they searched for intruders. Moving silently, Rachel, Ethan, Claire, and Daniel slipped past the outer defenses, their hearts pounding with every step. Inside, they found General Reed overseeing final preparations for the weapon's deployment. Confronting him was risky, but they had no time to waste. Stepping into the light, Rachel held up the drive containing their presentation. "Before you do this, you need to see this," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Reed hesitated, his gaze flickering between the group and the countdown timer ticking steadily toward 0. In that moment, the fate of humanity hung precariously in the balance. The aliens waited above, ready to pass judgment on a species teetering between redemption and ruin. And below, 4 ordinary individuals stood united, determined to prove that even in the face of unimaginable odds, there was still room for hope. End of document. Part 4. General Reed stared at the small drive in Rachel's trembling hand, his face unreadable. The room was silent except for the faint hum of machinery and the relentless ticking of the countdown timer. Seconds stretched into an eternity as he weighed his options. Finally, he motioned for one of his aides to take the drive and insert it into a nearby computer. The screen flickered to life, displaying the presentation Rachel, Ethan, Claire, and Daniel had worked tirelessly to create. Images of human kindness, innovation, and resilience filled the monitor. Children planting trees, scientists developing clean energy solutions, communities rebuilding after disasters. Reed's expression softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. "This doesn't change what they've done," he muttered, glancing at the timer, "but maybe it changes what we do next." Outside, the alien ship hovered silently above Mount Hood, its crew preparing to execute the sterilization protocol. Vera stood at the control panel, her fingers hovering over the activation sequence. She hesitated, her mind replaying Lyran's words about the individuals who sought understanding. Then, without warning, the ship's communication system crackled to life. A signal from Earth, a video feed transmitted directly to their monitors. On screen, Rachel's face appeared, her eyes filled with determination. "We know you're watching," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Please let us show you who we really are." Behind her, the rest of the group stood united, their expressions reflecting a mix of hope and fear. Vera watched intently as the presentation unfolded, her heart stirring with a mixture of emotions. The images were simple, yet powerful, offering glimpses of humanity's capacity for compassion and creativity. For every act of destruction, there seemed to be an equal measure of healing. It was a paradox that resonated deeply with her own doubts about the mission. When the video ended, silence fell over the bridge. Kalen, still weak but conscious, spoke softly from his medical bay. "Perhaps we have judged too quickly," he said, his voice carrying a tone of regret. Vera turned to him, her resolve wavering. "If we stop now, we risk leaving behind a species that may one day threaten others," she replied. Kalen shook his head gently. "Or we leave behind a species capable of greatness." Back at the military base, General Reed made his decision. He ordered the countdown halted, much to the surprise of his subordinates. "We'll give them a chance," he announced, his voice echoing through the room. "But if this goes wrong, it's on all of us." Rachel exhaled sharply, tears welling up in her eyes as relief washed over her. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, while Claire and Daniel exchanged weary smiles. They had succeeded in buying humanity a little more time, but the real test was yet to come. The aliens received the message just moments before the sterilization protocol was set. To activate, Vera stepped away from the controls, her hands trembling as she processed the weight of the decision before her. After a long pause, she addressed the crew. "We will not destroy this planet," she declared, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her heart. "Not yet." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, though some faces betrayed lingering doubts. Vera turned to Lyran, who had returned to the ship after observing the humans' efforts. "You were right to trust them," she said, simply. Lyran nodded, its holographic form shimmering faintly as it absorbed the gravity of the moment. With the immediate threat neutralized, Rachel, Ethan, Claire, and Daniel found themselves standing together outside the base, watching as dawn broke over the horizon. The air felt lighter somehow, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath. "Do you think it's over?" Claire asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the sky. Ethan shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe not over," he replied, "but maybe it's a start." Rachel nodded, her thoughts drifting to the countless lives that had been touched by the events of the past days. Humanity had been given a second chance, but whether it would rise to the occasion remained to be seen. As the alien ship began its ascent, Vera addressed Earth one final time. Using a universal translator, she broadcast a message across the globe. "We came seeking answers," she said, her voice calm yet commanding. "What we found was complexity, a species capable of both great harm and great good. We leave now, but know this: your actions will determine your future. Choose wisely." The transmission ended abruptly, and the ship disappeared into the atmosphere, leaving behind only a faint trail of light. In the days that followed, the world slowly began to heal. Governments issued statements urging unity and cooperation, while grassroots movements inspired by Rachel and her team gained momentum. People around the globe came together to address the environmental damage caused by centuries of neglect, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. Scientists collaborated on projects aimed at reversing climate change, while educators emphasized the importance of empathy and understanding in schools. It was far from perfect, but it was progress. Rachel returned to her work as a marine biologist, finding solace in the rhythms of the ocean. Ethan joined her occasionally, sharing stories of geological discoveries that hinted at Earth's resilience. Claire left her job at the intelligence agency, choosing instead to dedicate herself to advocacy work focused on transparency and accountability. Daniel continued writing, using his platform to amplify voices calling for positive change. Together, they remained connected by the shared experience that had brought them together, an experience none of them would ever forget. For the aliens, the journey home was filled with reflection. Vera spent hours staring out at the stars, pondering the lessons learned during their brief encounter with humanity. Kalen recovered slowly, his injuries serving as a reminder of the cost of misunderstanding. Though their mission had ended differently than expected, they carried with them a newfound appreciation for the complexities of life in the universe. Perhaps, they thought, the true measure of a civilization lay not in its perfection, but in its potential, and so the story concluded, not with a definitive resolution, but with the promise of possibility. Humanity had been tested, and though it had faltered, it had also shown glimpses of hope. The aliens departed, leaving behind a cryptic warning and an unspoken challenge. Whether Earth would rise to meet that challenge depended on the choices made by those who called it home. In the end, the fragile balance between destruction and redemption rested not in the stars, but in the hearts of ordinary people striving to make a difference.